The topic will be Buddhism and Peace, and the chair of the session is Professor Ampon Namat, the Vice Rector of Administrative Affairs of Chulalongkorn University.
Namaskar. Distinguished participants, colleagues, and friends. Day before yesterday, we began this symposium with what I personally believe, the most inspiring and thought-provoking keynote address by our distinguished friend from India, Dr. Kothari, which I understand has set the proper tone and even direction for the deliberations and discussion during these past 3 days. Now that the conference is drawing to a close, it is most appropriate for us to expose ourselves to another lecture by another scholar of peace, the Most Reverend Parasa Varamuni. Being a monk, a Buddhist monk, our speaker needs, to my mind, a little, if at all, elaborate introduction. So I will be very brief. The Most Reverend Parasa Varamuni prominence in Buddhist studies began very early in his life. He graduated with the highest degree of the Thai traditional Pali studies, Pali grade 9, when he was still a novice. And when he obtained his BA degree in Buddhist studies from Chulalongkorn Buddhist University, he did obtain it with the highest distinction, the first class honors. And in recognition of his invaluable contributions, he was later conferred an honorary doctorate in Buddhist studies. A noted lecturer and writer, the Most Reverend Parasa Varamuni traveled quite extensively to world-famous centers of education, and he wrote a great number of books, in fact more than 50 books on Buddhism, one of which is Social Dimension of Buddhism in Contemporary Thailand. With this brief introduction, now I turn to you, your friend, and with due respect, sir, I would invite you to deliver your talk to this distinguished gathering.
Mr. Chairman, venerable brothers and friends, ladies and gentlemen, the current year of 1986 has been specially named the International Year of Peace. But when one looks at the state of affairs in the world of today, he may wonder if the present time is entitled to that cheerful and honorable appellation. I think we should rather call it the International Year in Need of Peace. Obviously, we are now living in a period of time when the world is badly in need of peace. It is not peace that prevails in the world at this time, but its antithesis, war and violence, that is prevalent. Instead of peace, wars and conflicts become widespread and develop both in kind and in degree of fatality. People are too familiar with news and reports on regional conflicts, fighting between religious groups, fanaticism, terrorism, ideological persecutions and warfare, chemical warfare, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons to the point of risking a nuclear war and the mass destruction of mankind. In addition to these lethal operations, so many conditions pointing to the state of social disorder and degeneration predominate, such as domestic crimes, drug addiction, drug trafficking, environmental pollution, energy crisis, unemployment, serious mental disorders, suicides, and all forms of violences. Seemingly, men are making all efforts to turn the earth into an unsafe place to live. Peace and happiness seem to be farther and farther away, if not beyond reach. Various forms of problems affecting peace are on the increase, eroding the hope of happy and peaceful living. The official symbol or logo of the International Year of Peace is portrayed by a dove above two hands in the enclosure of an olive branch. To stray a little from the traditional symbolism, the dove represents peace and the olive branch prosperity, while the two hands stand for the whole mankind. The dove looks like flying out of the enclosure of the olive branch away from the two hands which are trying to hold it back. In an arbitrary interpretation to suit the current situation, peace has slipped out of the hands of man, who, even though in the midst of wealth and affluence, lost it and is desperately struggling to get it back. It has been a hope and a dream of man that with scientific and technological advances, man will be in possession of all that he wants and in control of everything he comes into contact with, and then live happily in peace. Truly, man has succeeded to a considerable extent in scientific and technological endeavors. Through scientific and technological progress, man seems to have been equipped with all that he needs to make himself and his society happy and peaceful. However, on the contrary, problems so increase that man himself cannot find peace and society is in turmoil. Why? Through medical advances, the lifespan of man has been lengthened. More and more people, including the youth, find their lives in society so unsatisfactory that they seek to shorten their life by suicide. These people turn their head and dissatisfaction inside to kill themselves, while many others turn it outwardly to cause conflicts with their neighbors and troubles in society. Moreover, in man's efforts to conquer nature, natural environment becomes polluted and causes many to live shorter, unhealthy lives. Nature is not on good terms with man. Finding no peace with nature, man's hope for happiness is even more frustrated. All in all, man fails to realize peace and happiness. His dream does not come true. The year of peace does not turn out to be the year when peace prevails, but the year when peace is badly needed. The road to peace turns out to be the road out of peace, and the path to happiness transforms into the path away from happiness. At least peace and happiness are on the way, while troubles and miseries gain the place of eminence. Here, the question is very simple. Why has it been so? And to this, the answer is also simple. Because the man has not been developed. Truly, man has greatly developed for his own benefit all kinds of things in the name of civilization, including science and technology. But he has paid too little attention to the development of his own self. Man thinks of himself as the enjoyer of developments, not as an object of development. Human problems are therefore the same now as before, this year as 3 or 10,000 years ago, and human ways of action are of the same nature. They may take different forms, and the place of emphasis may change under different circumstances. Legends and history tell us of kings, princes, and warriors of yore who waged war with one another to win the hands of some beautiful princesses or ladies. Others invaded their neighbor and pillaged on towns and cities of the defeated. Today, conflicts grow between industrial powers, and we witness the trade warriors battling for resources and markets. Kings of the old times marched their troops into the wars of conquest, expanding their empires in order to be hailed the great emperors or the most powerful conquerors. The nuclear powers nowadays, driven by fear of each other and the urge for primacy, engage in the arms race for military superiority. In ancient times, fanatical rulers persecuted people of other faiths and went into religious or holy wars. Modern nations sponsor war, both whole and shooting ones, in different parts of the world in order to spread their political and economic isms or as part of their ideological propagation. Primitive people fought with one another using sticks and stones. Feudal warriors fought with swords and bows. Modern soldiers also fight, but they resort to grenades and missiles for their weapons. With the modern means of rapid and far-reaching communication, and with the most efficient and powerful equipments and weapons provided by scientific and technological advances, modern problems appear in a vast variety of manifestations, affecting mankind in a wider scale and in the highest degree of severity. In spite of all the ostensible differences, the motive behind the actions are the same ones. All forms of wars, conflicts, rivalries, and quarrels, whether between individuals, groups, or nations, or at the global level, whether current or long time ago, can be traced to the same three categories of self-centered motives or tendencies, namely, first, selfish desire for pleasures and acquisitions, in Pali tanha. Second, egotistical lust for dominance and power, in Pali mana. And third, clinging to view, faith, or ideology, in the Pali language, Tithi. if not refined, wisely channeled, or replaced by wholesome mental qualities, these three self-centered tendencies of the mind develop and intensify so that the behavior of the person becomes dangerous to others and to society. First, the selfish desire for pleasures and acquisitions leads to attachment to wealth and greed for possessions. Its influence to cause price, exploitation, corruption, competition, and conflict is too obvious, needing no description. This also explains why the wealth-creating possibilities of new technology now seem boundless, the gap between the rich and the poor widens. The polarization of riches and poverty becoming strong and sharpening. Despite the advances in food production through the enormous potential opened up by new agricultural technologies, and while food for all is a perfectly realizable objective, starvation becomes widespread and hundreds of thousands of human beings starve to death. The advanced technology and new economic approaches are utilized in such a way that they serve the industrialized countries only for making more profit, and developing countries only help to strengthen the economies of the developed one. The profit maximizing approach of the current economic system and the consumer culture serve only to divert born savings away from developing countries and make richer the developed countries. The modern modes of production lead to the benefits of capital accumulation. While costs are borne by all, benefits accrue to a few. The rich becomes richer and the poor poorer. The number of what the World Bank calls the absolute poor is around 800 million. In spite of many foreign aid programs and advances in production technology, the world faces with economic crisis. The unequal distribution of wealth still prevails. Moreover, craving for sensual enjoyment and sensual indulgence lead to the lavish consumption of natural resources and the polluting of the environment, resulting in the depletion of resources, health problems, and the worsening of the problems of poverty. With hunger and mass misery prevailing, the risk of war increases and world peace is unrealizable. Secondly, with craving for dominance and lust for power, individuals, groups, parties, and nations struggle and vie with one another for primacy or superiority. With hostile attitudes, some come into quarrels, conflict, fighting, and wars. Even in the absence of an open conflict, they live in fear, suspicion, distrust, and anxiety. At national and international levels, this is detrimental to mutual security, development, and peaceful living. Political leaders resort to arms as props for political power. Developed countries lend aid to developing countries with ulterior motive for their own benefit, including the creation of a permanent dependence. At the same time, numbers of people in developing countries are careless and dishonest in the handling of aid and loans. Foreign aid programs are surrounded by the climate of disillusion and distrust. At the global level, the world has for many decades been dominated by the hostile relationship of the superpowers in their quest for security and superiority through arms race. World military expenditure is well over $1.5 million every minute of every day. A United Nations Development Program Administrator, in his statement to the United Nations General Assembly Second Special Disarmament Session in 1982, says, all the technical cooperation the United Nations Development Program has been charged to provide to developing countries over the next 5 years will cost less than the sum that will be consumed in world armaments expenditures in the next 4 days. The late Lord Philip Noenbaker at a conference in London in January 1977 said to the effect that for an expenditure of $500 million, about the cost of an aircraft carrier, the World Health Organization could eliminate forever malaria, trachoma, leprosy, and jaws, the 4 diseases that impose a heavy load of economic loss and human sufferings in the third world. This shows how human, material, and financial resources have been used far greater for negative and destructive purposes than for positive and constructive purposes. It is evident how the arms race is worsening the economic crisis and thus makes the world overarmed and undernourished. The arms race is a threat to world security and human survival, both militarily and economically. Militarily, the military forces and weapons arsenals of the superpowers have grown far beyond their defensive requirements to the capability of eradicating all life from the earth. This is a threat to all people. Economically, as the arms race and development compete for the same resources, the immensely rising worldwide military expenditures have strong negative effects on economic growth and development and human welfare in general. The nuclear arsenals kill millions of human beings even without being used, because they eat up the resources without which people are put to death by starvation. With or without wars, human society cannot fare happily in peace. Thirdly, last in order but not least in controlling power, is clinging to view, theory, faith, and ideology. Since the old times, owing to differences in faith and belief, people have come into conflict. Some wage war with their neighbors out of religious fanaticism. Some even marched their armies invading faraway lands to force their faith on other peoples and made conquests in the name of their supreme being. While conflicts between religious groups and factions still continue today, modern people at the wars and conflicts of economic systems and political ideologies. Nations even divide into competing ideological blocs. Religious and ideological persecutions and wars, both caught and shooting between religious groups and factions, and between those who quarrel about different ideas of the best way to achieve happiness for all, especially between the superpowers that preach different ideologies, though these can be found in many parts of the world, dominating all other kinds of conflict. Predictably, not finding peaceful means of ideological propagation and coexistence, what will prevail is not world peace and happiness that those faith and ideologies prescribe, but human suffering and death. On the present-day global scene of conflicts and wars, it is not any specific one of these three motives that drive people to the battlefield, but it is all three of them combined together that come into play, and their combination only makes the situation more serious, the problem more complicated, and the solution more difficult to achieve. For example, employers want to pay least and get most profit, while employees want to work least and be paid most wages. Why one party decides to take advantage of the other, the two come into conflict. Competing to win, they try to gain dominance over each other. To strengthen their own confidence and their claims and complaints, they turn for support to economic ideologies. Conflict of gains becomes also a conflict of ideologies. In an ideological conflict, ideological sympathizers and partisans take sides. The conflict then grows in all possibilities at the expense of the hope for peace. How can we stop wars and conflict? How can we be sure that peace will prevail and become long-lasting? Some might say that love and cooperation must be established in place of competition and conflict. This seems to be too easy an answer. It looks impractical. We have to further ask, how can we turn hostility and conflict into love and cooperation? So long as man is overcome by any of the three self-centered tendencies, true love and cooperation are impossible. If man acts out of any of them, he cannot be on good terms with others. He will only hurt them and cause in them hatred and anger. With his own desire counter, challenge, or defy, he himself develops anger and hatred. From anger and hatred ensue only hostility and conflict, not love, cooperation, or peace. For people who are in conflict, one or the other must first act in the way of peace. But for them, such action would mean a loss. They would say they are forced to struggle to will. There is no other choice. The real solution must be made before the conflict starts. To put it more correctly, there must be a fundamental change in the behavior of man in such a way that he will never start a conflict. To get the real practical solution, we must turn to the answer to a more fundamental question. Enabled by science and technology to increase both the capability to solve most problems and the capacity to destroy everything, why does man tend to choose the latter? Why has the abundance of human talent and material resources been devoted to negative and destructive purposes of arms build-ups and militarization instead of being positively utilized in developing the means of securing a stable and lasting peace? As given earlier, the answer is simple. Because man has been so engrossed in the development of all things outside that he has neglected the task of developing his own self. He lives himself almost an unchanged man who follows the driving force of instincts rather than the guidance of wisdom. Professor Albert Einstein accepted this when he said to the effect that the atomic bomb has changed everything except the mind and the thinking of people. Science and technology serve to advance the frontiers of human knowledge and potential either for better or for worse. They provide man with free and full scope to exercise his free will on the material world. If he acts in the direction of peace and happiness, everything on earth is on his side to achieve it. If his action turns toward war and misery, he can exterminate the whole race of mankind in a matter of seconds. That which direction he will take is a question of human development. If man has been well developed, he will be able to steer technology and all other vehicles of civilization for the goal of peace and mutual well-being. Unfortunately, the development of the inner core of man, the mind, the formation of character and spiritual values has not kept pace with the rapid progress of technology. Though man has developed to the highest degree of possibility, the technical capabilities, man still has not developed in himself the qualities needed to live and to deal with his own self, with others, and with his natural and technological environment. The undeveloped or underdeveloped condition of man, of his mind and character, and of his liberating wisdom is discernible in many ways. First, man behaves wrongly and unwisely in relation to happiness. Man looks at happiness as something he is in search of, that is, something unattained, not already in hand. In other words, man himself is here and now not happy, and he is looking for something to make him happy. With this attitude, he mistreats happiness both in time and in space. In time, happiness is for him a state he hopes to realize sometime in the future, something in prospect, not yet realized. In space, happiness is for him a state to be attained to by satisfying himself with something found or obtained from outside. That is an external satisfying object. In either way, he cannot find true happiness. The unhappy man has to run forever after happiness and also has to depend for happiness on things outside of his control. Many people would ever sacrifice his already existing happiness, essentially the inner peace and happiness of the mind, to chase the hope for happiness. Like the dog that drops the piece of meat in its mouth in a hope to catch the other piece seen reflected in the pond. If he succeeds, he gets a superficial happiness to the loss of the profound one. If he does not, his loss is twofold, and anguish is his lot. In the contest of running to grab the pleasure-giving material, the unhappy people unavoidably come into conflict. Moreover, their restless search for happiness goes on at the expense of the inner happiness and peace of mind. Thus, in this process of ever running after pleasure, peace and happiness are not found either within or without. This also shows how people are unscientific. Modern men may have scientific attitudes towards the whole universe, but that covers only the material world of phenomena. Regarding their own selves, their life and mind, their approaches are not scientific at all. The way they treat their lives and deal with peace and happiness is scientifically irrational. In the right and proper way, the man must be made happy here and now, not relying on the hope for pleasures from outside. For the happy man, pleasures that are upcoming only enhance his happiness. But for the unhappy or the happy to be man, these coming pleasures can only give extraneous and ephemeral satisfaction, bringing anxiety and tension on the coming and leaving regret and sorrow on the going. Just as the beauty wrought by cosmetics and decoration is not the real beauty, even so the happiness of external pleasure is not the real happiness. And just as cosmetics and decoration can be an increase to the real beauty, even so extraneous pleasures can enhance the real happiness. Emphatically, it is not merely the matter of real or unreal happiness of the man, but that of the lack of real happiness which leads to trouble and conflict in society. Therefore, first and before all else, the making of a happy man is the prerequisite for peace, and the development of man is the central question of development. Secondly, the unhappy man, in his effort to find something to make himself happy, causes even more trouble by resorting to a wrong means of obtaining it. He seeks enjoyment at the expense of others. As a man who seeks pleasure by going fishing with rod and line enjoys himself by causing suffering to the fish, people tend to seek happiness by directly or indirectly hurting others. At least they do not care what will happen to other life and the world of nature as a result of their selfish acts. From this spring conflicts and many other problems, such as the violation of human rights, injustice, poverty, and environmental pollution. In such unfriendly and depressed atmosphere, people themselves cannot enjoy real peace and happiness. As the Buddha says, whoever seeks happiness by inflicting suffering on others is enmeshed in hostile relations and will not be free from enmity. In fact, it is the hurter himself that will first be hurt, rather than the others whom he wants to cause loss and trouble to. In the word of the Buddha, the man spoils himself first before he hurts others. Some people even seek to enjoy themselves at the expense of their own life. Drug addicts and alcoholics are among this kind of people. All the pleasure-seeking activities of these unhappy people are inhibitions to peaceful living. They form the behavioral pattern of an undeveloped or underdeveloped man. A developed man is, on the contrary, happy of his own nature as a result of the development of his own self, and seeks to enjoy himself by means of what brings happiness both to himself and to others. In other words, a developed man is characterized by his inherent happiness and the way of enjoying himself, in which he diffuses happiness among people throughout society. In another way of speaking, a man in his relationship with other people, both consciously and unconsciously, shares with the latter what he has. If he has happiness, he gives out happiness. If he has unhappiness, he gives out unhappiness. Especially for the unhappy man, he is weighed down with his unhappiness, and in an effort to get rid of it, he desperately throws off his unhappiness onto people all around. Thus, the undeveloped unhappy man will render a peaceful society an impossibility. Then, it is imperative that people be developed to be happy if any hope for peace is to be realized. Again, so many people in this technological age who succeed in obtaining material gains and sensual pleasures to gratify their desire, in no long time find that they become bored and discontented and feel that these gains and pleasures do not give them real happiness. Tired of the ceaseless, unsuccessful quest for happiness, surrounded by the ever-increasing unsolved problems rampant in society and all over the world, and finding no better means of realizing happiness, these people develop boredom, frustration, anxiety, and confusion. They live unhappily without peace of mind. This condition is going to be the characteristic of the present-day society. In sum, the failure of man to secure peace and happiness lies in that, being unhappy and not developing himself to be happy, man struggles in vain to realize peace and happiness by setting out in the two wrong ways. He seeks to make himself happy with pleasures from outside, and in this way covers up or plasters over his unhappiness with extraneous pleasures. As the man himself has not been changed, the process of covering or plastering has to run on endlessly. And as it is there deep inside, the unhappiness will never vanish despite any amount of plaster or cover-up. Simultaneously, as this process of unrestrained pursuit of ever-increasing pleasures has to go on at the expense of or in competition with other people, it results in hate, anger, trouble, conflict, and the loss of peace and happiness both in the mind of the man and in society. Otherwise, the man, with his inherent unhappiness, seeks to make himself happy by giving out or throwing off his unhappiness onto others. Other people will then react and retaliate in kind and possibly in a higher degree of severity. In this way also, instead of finding the real happiness, he only increases, intensifies, and diffuses unhappiness far and wide. Thus, the process of human search for happiness becomes the process of driving peace away. In other words, desiring one thing, man does the cause for the arising of another. Desiring happiness, he does the cause of suffering. Desiring peace, he does the cause of hatred and conflict. In Buddhism, peace, or in Pali language, santi, and happiness, in Pali term, sukha, are synonymous. An unhappy man cannot find peace, and there can be no peace without happiness. In absence of peace, no people can be happy, and those who are unhappy cannot live in peace. A Buddha saying is, there is no happiness beyond peace. However, it is of much significance to note that Buddhism prescribes freedom as another synonym for peace and happiness. Only the free man can be possessed of peace and happiness. Endowed with freedom, people can live happy and peaceful lives. There are roughly 4 levels of freedom, the achievement of which is indispensable for the realization of peace and happiness. Namely, first, physical freedom or freedom in relation to the material world or physical environment, natural or technological. This covers freedom from the shortage of the basic needs of life, the requisites of food, clothing, shelter, and health care. Freedom consisting in safety from life-threatening calamities and unfavorable natural conditions, that is, to have, among other things, beneficent natural environment. The wise use of natural resources, requisites of life and technology in such a way that they serve man to enhance his life qualities, and the man does not become a slave, being subject to them for his good or evil, happiness or sorrow. Second, social freedom or freedom in relation to other people, community, society, or social environment. This is represented by freedom from oppression, persecution, exploitation, injustice, crimes, violation of human rights, discrimination, violence, terrorism, conflict, fighting and war, all in violation of the 5 precepts, or in positive terms, good and friendly relationship with neighbors, social welfare, and such values as equality, liberty, fraternity, discipline, respect for law, tolerance, and cooperation. Third, emotional freedom or freedom of the heart. At the ideal level, this refers to the state of freedom from all traces of mental defilements and suffering. The state of mind that is unshaken by worldly vicissitudes, purified, sorrow-free, secure and profoundly happy and peaceful, that is to say Nibbana. It includes freedom from all kinds of mental illness, stress and strain, anxiety, worry, boredom, frustration, fear, depression, avariciousness, greed, jealousy, hatred, ill will, sloth, torpor, restlessness, remorse, and uncertainty. Or in positive terms, the state of being endowed with beneficent mental qualities such as love, compassion, sympathetic joy, equanimity, confidence, mindfulness, conscience, forbearance, generosity, tranquility, concentration, mental strength and firmness, and perfect mental health, consisting of mental clarity and purity, peacefulness and happiness. Fourth, intellectual freedom or freedom of and true knowledge and wisdom. Belonging to this class of freedom are the process of perceiving and learning that is free from distortion by any bias or ulterior motive, freedom of thinking and judgment, and the free exercise of knowledge and wisdom that are just, honest, and sincere, not influenced by prejudices, self-interest, greed, hatred, or any selfish motive, and the knowledge of all things as they really are, or the insight into the true nature of all things, together with the emotional freedom as its corollary, and the life view and world view that are based on that knowledge. The 4 levels of freedom are interrelated and interdependent. Without a minimum of physical freedom, the road to the other 3 levels of freedom is blocked. Without intellectual and emotional freedom, the wise use of resources as physical freedom is rendered impossible. Lacking the freedom of knowledge and wisdom, the mind cannot be set free. In the absence of the freedom of the heart, social freedom is only a dream. Except for social freedom, physical freedom cannot come true. With this fourfold freedom, peace and happiness are surely secure, and they are real peace or real happiness, found both within and without. That is, peace and happiness that are deep-rooted in the mind of man and prevalent outside in society. Under physical freedom, man is relatively free from the oppression of nature, and he also does not exploit or spoil nature, but makes wise and unselfish use of natural resources to achieve mutual well-being both of man and of nature. He thus lives in peace with nature, equipped with all kinds of facilities provided by science and technology as his servant, not himself turning into their slave. Man can be said to have fulfilled the physical aspect of the good or ideal life. With this physical freedom as the firm foundation, man is in a good position to realize the three other aspects of freedom. With such obvious advances in science and technology, man should have achieved physical freedom. However, on the contrary, it turns out that despite all the scientific and technological achievements, problems of human suffering, even at the physical level, instead of decreasing, are on the increase. This seems to be the dilemma of human progress. The answer lies partly in the disenchantment of man of the wish-granting power of science and technology, and partly in the readjustment of man's relationship with the same. So far, man seems to have put too much trust in science and technology, as if they were the sole designer of his good life, and to have increasingly been dependent on them to the ignorance and neglect of the development of his own self. He does not realize that the fulfillment of the good life depends on himself, who created and who is served by science and technology. He himself needs to be so developed that he can master the service and control of science and technology for his own freedom and well-being. Otherwise, he himself may be dominated or exterminated by what he has created. Man has been so much enchanted by scientific and technological progress that he is misled into believing that he has almost completely conquered nature and has control over it. He also believes that with this conquest of nature, all problems will be solved and heaven will be established on earth. But he is not aware that the nature that he thinks he has conquered is not the whole of it, but only a part of it, possibly a half of it, that is the external material world. The other half is within himself, the nature of man, or the man as a part of nature. In the process of struggle to conquer the material world of nature, man even often neglects his responsibility to master the inner nature within himself and tends to lose control over it. Conversely, this inner nature has grown stronger and stronger and has taken much control over man. Thus, in looking outside with a pride that he has conquered nature, man has unconsciously been conquered by the nature inside himself and obediently come under its control. It is this unconquered, controlling nature within man that has frustrated all his hope of turning the earth into paradise. It is this nature that keeps unhappy the inner man under the plaster of happiness-like pressure and causes the unhappy man to diffuse unhappiness and the unpeaceful man to diffuse peacelessness, violence, and conflict in society. This also explains why so many efficient and effective methods and measures to solve the various problems of mankind do not work out. By way of illustration, when the abundance of consumer goods more than adequate to satisfy the basic needs of people has been made possible by scientific and technological advances, and only proper distribution is needed to achieve mutual well-being, it is often not distribution that is carried out, but it is the hoarding, accumulation, grabbing and fighting for the goods that turn out to reign, resulting in poverty and conflict instead of peace and well-being. This is also true with the different groups, factions, parties and nations that cannot clear up their differences, that start armed conflict, that continue to fight, and so on. Notwithstanding, the solution looks very simple and easy. Scientific knowledge is limited to the data received through the sense organs. Its domain is the material world, its knowledge of which is really enormous. However, science knows only little about the man. When a man is depressed and frustrated, and his mind is filled with fear, unrest, and anxiety, science and technology can be of no sound and substantial help. Crimes, violences, and various kinds of immoral acts still abound even in countries which are most advanced in science and technology. Science and technology are unable to make man better. Despite all the advances in science and technology, the inner man is left basically unchanged. Modern problems remain the same in nature as those afflicting our ancestors. They differ only in the matter of their greater number, wider variety, and greater magnitude. With the unprecedented availability of all advantage, science and technology bring to the undeveloped man only heightened feelings of dependence and insufficiency. And with their destructive potential, they make him feel even more insecure. Science and technology has rendered great help to man in the conquest of nature, here the material world, but they cannot give him moral guidance and control over his mind. He may be able to conquer the world, but cannot conquer himself. The man, the mind, his inner nature and his development, along with his real peace and happiness, are beyond science and technology. They are not their province, but they are the domain of the Dhamma or religion in a special sense of the term. Accordingly, we have here two complementary domains of human quest for freedom and perfection, the inner and the outer ones. Preoccupation with the outer domain to the ignorance or neglect of the inner one leads only to partial success or even to total failure. The success in achieving freedom, peace, and happiness for man lies in the proper recognition and understanding of the nature, significance, capacity, and limitations of each of these two domains as they really are, and in the attitudes and practices in conformity with such understanding. The process by which to achieve freedom is called development, and in Buddhism, as far as man is concerned, development is synonymous with education. Just as freedom is of four levels, development or education is for four, namely physical development that leads to physical freedom, social development that leads to social freedom, emotional development that leads to emotional freedom, and intellectual development that leads to intellectual freedom. As for physical freedom and physical development, a considerable contribution to success must be credited to science and technology. The immense achievement of science and technology must be greatly appreciated. They must not be underestimated, though also not exaggerated. Through scientific and technological development, great material abundance has been provided to such an extent that goods and facilities are more than needed to serve all people to make them happy. Science and technology have brought physical freedom within their easy reach. It is up to men themselves whether they will utilize them to contribute to their happiness or to their unhappiness. If problems arise, it is not science and technology that are to blame. The fault lies with the man himself who failed to make wise and proper use of science and technology, but seek their services as occasions for the discharge and maximization of his three self-centered tendencies or impulses of selfish desire for pleasures and acquisitions, egotistical lust for dominance and power, and clinging to views and ideology. How can we find fault with them? How can we find fault with science and technology? Why scientific and technological developments are merely products of human creation. Now, it is at this point that the contribution or complementary service of the true religion or the Dhamma is needed. It is needed for the development of the man himself, so that he will create only constructive technology and make wise and proper use of science, technology, and all resources, human and natural, for beneficial